In 1999, companies with no revenue, no profit, and sometimes barely a functioning product were worth billions of dollars because they had a .com in their name, and investors were convinced the internet would make anything profitable eventually. 18 months later, trillions of dollars evaporated. Companies that were worth more than entire industries disappeared completely. Right now, the 5 largest tech companies in America are collectively planning to spend over $1 trillion building physical infrastructure for artificial intelligence, data centers the size of small cities, enough electricity demand to strain national power grids, and a growing number of serious analysts are asking the exact same question people were too optimistic to ask in 1999. What happens if the returns never show up? Is this 1999 all over again? Or is this time genuinely different? Let's actually find out. To understand whether history is repeating itself, we need to understand what actually happened the first time. In the mid-1990s, the internet was new, and everyone could feel that it was going to be enormous. Telecom companies looked at this coming wave and made a specific bet. Bandwidth demand was about to explode, so whoever controlled the physical infrastructure, the actual fiber optic cables carrying data, would control the future. So they built, aggressively. Companies laid hundreds of thousands of miles of fiber optic cable across the country and under oceans, based on projections of internet growth that assumed the boom would simply continue indefinitely. At the same time, a wave of internet startups launched with business models built almost entirely around future potential rather than present profit. Companies went public with zero revenue. The dominant metrics of success weren't profit margins, they were eyeballs and clicks. How many people visited your website mattered more than whether your website made any money. Investors poured money in anyway because the story was compelling. Get in early and you'd own a piece of the next transformative technology. The Nasdaq, home to most of these tech stocks, climbed to previously unimaginable heights. Then, starting in March 2000, it all came apart. Funding dried up. Companies with no path to actual profit ran out of runway. The Nasdaq lost nearly 80% of its value over the following 2 years. An estimated $5 trillion in market value vanished. And here's the detail that matters most for our comparison today. All that fiber optic cable that had been laid so aggressively, massive portions of it sat completely unused for years afterward. Industry insiders called it dark fiber, capacity built for a demand curve that hadn't caught up yet. The infrastructure wasn't wrong exactly, it was just built years ahead of the market that would eventually need it. That's the historical pattern everyone's now nervously measuring against artificial intelligence. So let's look at the first and most obvious parallel: infrastructure built ahead of confirmed demand. In the late 1990s, the logic was, lay the cable now and the bandwidth demand will eventually arrive to fill it. Build first, justify later. Today, the same basic logic is driving an even larger wave of spending. The major hyperscalers, Alphabet, Amazon, Meta, Microsoft, and Oracle, are collectively committing trillions of dollars in projected capital expenditure to build data centers and stockpile the specialized computer chips called GPUs needed to run advanced AI systems. These aren't modest investments. We're talking about facilities on the scale of small cities, consuming electricity on a scale that's beginning to strain regional power grids in some areas. The physical footprint of this build-out dwarfs anything the telecom industry attempted in the 1990s, and the underlying bet is structurally identical to the fiber optic bet. Build the infrastructure now on the assumption that AI demand will eventually grow large enough to justify the investment. If you build it, they will come. Just replace bandwidth with compute. Here's where the comparison gets uncomfortable. Estimates suggest a large majority of current enterprise AI projects fail to deliver clear, measurable business outcomes. Companies are experimenting, piloting, testing, but conclusive proof that this spending translates into proportional value is still, for now, more promise than proof. That's eerily similar to the eyeballs over profit mentality of the .com era. Except this time, it's not startups burning venture capital. It's the most profitable companies in the world burning their own cash reserves on a bet about the future. Here's the second parallel, and it's the one that should genuinely make you pause, because it's a warning sign investors specifically learned to watch for after 2000. In the .com era, there was a financial trick, not necessarily fraudulent but definitely misleading, that inflated the appearance of a healthy market. Internet equipment vendors would provide loans to .com startups, specifically so those startups could buy the vendor's own hardware. The vendor would then book that loan as revenue. Think about what that actually does to the numbers. Company A gives money to Company B. Company B spends that same money buying products from Company A. Company A now reports that transaction as real revenue growth. On paper, the industry looks robust and expanding. In reality, money is just moving in a circle, inflating the appearance of demand that isn't actually organic. The modern AI industry has developed a strikingly similar pattern. Large tech companies are investing equity stakes directly into AI startups. Those startups then spend a substantial portion of that same investment purchasing cloud computing services and hardware from the very same tech giants that just invested in them. Money flows out as an investment, money flows back in as revenue, the same dollars moving in a loop, being counted as economic activity twice. To be clear, this isn't necessarily illegal, and it doesn't automatically mean fraud. Some of these arrangements may reflect genuine, mutually beneficial business relationships, but structurally, this is precisely the pattern that inflated apparent market health in the final years before the dot-com crash, and its reappearance here is exactly the kind of signal that makes seasoned analysts nervous, regardless of how legitimate any individual deal might be. Here's the third parallel, and this one is measurable in real time, right now, in your own investment accounts if you own an index fund. The 1999 boom was defined by an unusually small handful of companies dominating the Nasdaq's total value. When a market's total worth becomes concentrated in a few names, that market becomes extremely vulnerable to those specific companies underperforming. The whole index rises or falls based on a handful of bets rather than a broad economy. Today, the concentration is arguably even more extreme. The largest technology companies currently account for a historically unprecedented share of the S&P 500's total market capitalization. When you invest in a broad market index fund today, believing you're diversifying across the American economy, a disproportionate share of that investment is actually riding on the continued success of a small handful of AI-exposed companies. This concentration means something specific and important. If AI spending fails to generate the returns currently being priced into these stocks, the damage wouldn't stay contained to a niche tech sector. It would ripple through the broader market in a way that touches retirement accounts, pension funds, and index funds held by people who've never even directly thought about artificial intelligence. This is the parallel that connects most directly to ordinary people rather than tech insiders and venture capitalists. And it's arguably the single biggest reason economists and financial commentators keep bringing up 1999, even when they acknowledge, as we're about to cover, that today's situation is genuinely different in some important ways. So far, everything we've covered points toward this looks like 1999 again, but an honest comparison has to look just as seriously at where the two eras genuinely diverge, because the differences here are substantial, not superficial. The first and probably most important difference: the companies driving this AI boom are not the cash-burning startups of the dot-com era. The primary architects of today's AI build-out, companies like Nvidia, Microsoft, and Alphabet, have massive, genuinely tangible free cash flow generated by highly profitable, already proven core businesses. In 1999, a huge share of internet companies were burning through venture capital with no profitable business underneath them, betting entirely on future growth to eventually justify their valuation. Today's AI spending is, by contrast, largely funded out of the pocket of companies that would remain highly profitable even if every dollar of AI investment failed to produce a single additional dollar of return. That's a structurally different kind of bet. It's speculative research and infrastructure spending layered on top of already solid, cash-generating businesses, not speculation as the entire foundation of the enterprise. The second major difference involves what's actually creating the current bottleneck. When the dot-com bubble burst, the collapse happened specifically because funding dried up. Investor confidence evaporated, capital stopped flowing, and companies with no profitable core simply ran out of money to keep operating. Today's constraints are different in kind. The current bottlenecks limiting AI expansion are physical, global electricity supply, and the specialized cooling infrastructure required to keep enormous data centers from overheating. These are engineering and energy problems, not primarily a crisis of investor confidence. That distinction matters because physical bottlenecks get solved through construction and engineering over time, whereas a confidence collapse can unwind in a matter of weeks. And the third meaningful difference is about who's actually placing these bets. The dot-com bubble was significantly fueled by retail investors, ordinary individual traders piling personal savings into unproven micro-cap tech stocks based on hype and momentum. The current AI build-out is overwhelmingly an institutional and, in some cases, sovereign-backed movement, driven by major corporations, large investment funds, and government-linked capital rather than individual retail speculation. That doesn't mean the price action is modest, and valuations are still elevated by most historical measures. But the nature of who's exposed and why they're exposed is genuinely different from the retail-driven frenzy of 1999. Here's what's genuinely interesting about this comparison once you strip away the simple "it's the same" or "it's totally different" takes. The two camps agree on more than you'd expect. Nobody serious, not the optimists, not the skeptics, is claiming that current AI spending has already proven itself with clear, widespread enterprise returns. The data on enterprise AI project success is genuinely underwhelming right now, and both sides acknowledge that gap. Nobody is claiming this infrastructure is being built without real risk of overcapacity. If AI adoption grows more slowly than projected, some of this data center capacity absolutely could end up as the modern equivalent of dark fiber. Genuinely valuable eventually, but built years ahead of the demand curve that justifies it economically today. And nobody disputes that market concentration in a handful of companies creates real systemic risk. If those specific companies stumble, regardless of how sound their individual balance sheets currently look. Where the two camps genuinely diverge isn't on these facts, it's on how much those facts should worry you, given the profitability cushion, the physical rather than purely psychological nature of the current bottlenecks, and the institutional rather than retail nature of the capital involved. Optimists look at the same data and see a temporary overbuild that will eventually be absorbed by genuine massive AI demand, backed by companies wealthy enough to absorb the weight. Skeptics look at the same data and see familiar warning signs of a bubble that's simply better funded and better disguised than the last one. So if you wanted to actually watch this situation unfold with real understanding rather than just picking a side based on vibes, here's what genuinely matters to track. First, enterprise AI return on investment data over the next few years. If the share of AI projects delivering clear, measurable business outcomes climbs substantially, that's evidence the infrastructure build-out is being justified by real demand. If it stays flat or worsens while spending keeps climbing, that's the clearest possible warning sign. It would mean the fundamental bet isn't paying off, regardless of how strong the underlying company's other business lines remain. Second, how those circular investment arrangements between tech giants and AI startups evolve. Increased transparency and genuinely independent revenue streams would ease concern. Continued or expanding circular financial structures, especially if they become harder to trace or disclose clearly, would be a legitimate red flag. Third, whether the free cash flow cushion at these major companies stays strong even as AI capital expenditure keeps climbing. As long as Microsoft, Alphabet, Amazon, and similar companies remain highly profitable independent of AI outcomes, they can absorb a slower than expected payoff without triggering a broader crisis. If AI spending starts meaningfully eating into their core profitability, the risk profile changes considerably. Fourth, whether the physical bottlenecks, electricity capacity, and cooling infrastructure get resolved roughly in step with genuine demand growth rather than infrastructure vastly outpacing actual usage for years, the way fiber optic cable did in the early 2000s. None of these are things you can know today, but they're the specific, trackable signals that will actually tell you which version of this story is playing out, rather than which version simply makes for a more dramatic headline. So after walking through all of this honestly, is the AI boom a repeat of the dot-com bubble, or is it something structurally different? The most accurate answer is also the least satisfying one. It's genuinely both, in different proportions than people assume. The speculative pattern is real. Infrastructure is being built ahead of confirmed demand, circular financial arrangements exist and echo a known warning sign. Market concentration has reached levels that create genuine systemic risk. Enterprise returns remain largely unproven. On these specific dimensions, the comparison to 1999 isn't hype, it's a legitimate evidence-based concern shared by serious analysts. But the foundation underneath this speculation is meaningfully sturdier than it was in 1999. The companies driving this aren't speculative shells betting their entire existence on an unproven idea. They're some of the most profitable companies in human history, using a portion of already earned cash to make a calculated bet on a technology they believe will matter enormously. The bottlenecks are physical engineering problems rather than a confidence crisis, which tends to unwind on a different, generally slower timeline, and the capital at risk is concentrated in institutions built to absorb volatility, rather than retail investors risking their personal savings on momentum alone. That doesn't mean a correction is impossible. Elevated valuations built on unproven returns can and do correct, sometimes sharply, regardless of how strong the underlying companies are. But it does mean that if a correction happens, it's more likely to look like a painful, significant repricing of expectations within otherwise solid companies, rather than the wholesale evaporation of an entire industry that defined the dot-com collapse. Here's what I'd actually want you to walk away with. History doesn't repeat itself exactly, but it does rhyme, and the specific rhymes here are worth taking seriously rather than dismissing. Build ahead of demand infrastructure, circular revenue arrangements, and extreme market concentration are not imaginary patterns. They're documented, trackable, and currently present in the AI build-out. At the same time, treating this as a simple, inevitable repeat of 2000 ignores real, substantive differences in who's funding this, what's actually constraining it, and how much cushion exists if the timeline runs longer than expected. The honest position isn't, this is definitely a bubble, or this time is completely different. It's watching the specific signals we just laid out and updating your view as real data comes in, rather than committing hard to a narrative before the evidence is actually there. Where do you land on this? Do you think the AI infrastructure boom is justified by what's coming, or do you think we're watching a better funded version of the same mistake? Let me know in the comments, and let me know which of the 4 signals we covered you'll actually be watching most closely. If this gave you a clearer framework for thinking about this instead of just another hot take, subscribe. We'll keep tracking this one as the data comes in. Take care.